3 quiet knocks came from beneath a floor that every screen called safe. On the upper deck of the Ivory Monarch, 3 miles off Newport Harbor, Andrew Kingsley lifted a glass of champagne beneath a ceiling of warm gold lights and smiled like a man who had already won. Around him, investors in dark suits watched a wall-sized display glow beside the contract table. Every deck, every cabin, every maintenance room, all of it mapped in clean green lines by Aegis C, the safety system Andrew had spent 5 years and hundreds of millions of dollars building. At 44, he was the white millionaire CEO everyone in marine technology wanted to impress, sharp-eyed, polished, and perfectly composed in an ivory blazer over a crisp white shirt. The yacht belonged to him. The system belonged to him. The room, in a quieter way, belonged to him too. "Nothing happens on my yacht unless I allow it," Andrew said, and the guests laughed because powerful men often made pride sound like humor. Near the service station, Hannah Brooks paused with a silver tray balanced in both hands. She was 28, a white waitress hired for the evening, her blonde hair tied back with a wine-red ribbon, her white service shirt neat beneath a black apron. She was supposed to refill glasses, clear plates, and remain invisible around people discussing numbers large enough to buy whole harbors. But Hannah had not learned life by being invisible. She had learned it by listening. Before yacht events, she had worked summer seasons on ferry routes in Maine, where a loose panel had a sound, a shifting tide had a rhythm, and a human hand knocking for help did not sound like machinery, no matter how badly rich people wanted machines to explain everything. The first knock came as Andrew pointed to the display. Soft. Below the floor. 3 taps. Then silence. Hannah's eyes moved down to the polished teak beneath her shoes. The guests kept smiling. The jazz kept playing. The screen still read, all clear in bright green letters. She waited. A second set came 30 seconds later. 3 taps. A pause. 2 taps. Her fingers tightened around the tray. Not pipes. Not the hull. Not the ice machine from the galley. A pattern. A person. She turned toward the crew access stairs, half hidden behind a curved panel of white lacquer and brass trim. The door was closed, but not fully latched. A thin line of yellow maintenance light showed at the bottom. Hannah stepped toward the event manager, a narrow-faced woman with a headset and a practiced fear of interrupting important men. "There is someone below deck," Hannah said quietly. "I heard knocking." The manager did not even look toward the stairs. "The lower deck is locked for the demo. That is why I am telling you. Do not embarrass Mr. Kingsley during the presentation." Hannah looked past her at Andrew. He was still speaking, his ivory blazer bright against the black water beyond the rail. Aegis C detects abnormal movement, manual lock failure, rising water, smoke, heat, distress signals, and unauthorized access before any human being could notice a problem. On the screen, every compartment glowed green. Hannah heard the third knock. Fainter now. 3. Pause. 2. The sound slipped under the music like a hand raised in a dark room. She walked away from the manager and crossed the deck. Andrew saw her before she reached him, and his smile cooled. "Miss, the guests are not being served by standing still." Hannah stopped beside the display, close enough for the investors to hear, but not loud enough to create panic. "Sir, someone is knocking from below deck, near the crew access stairs." Andrew looked at her uniform first, then at her face. "My yacht has more sensors than a hospital," he said, amused. "If someone needed saving, my system would know before you did." A few guests laughed softly. Hannah did not. She looked down at the floor where the sound had come from and answered, "Systems do not hear shame. People do." Andrew Kingsley stared at Hannah Brooks, as if she had spoken a foreign language in the middle of his own kingdom. "Systems do not hear shame." The sentence landed too quietly to be dramatic, but too clearly to be ignored. The investors nearest the display turned toward her. The event manager's face tightened with panic. Andrew gave a short laugh, polished and cold. "That is a poetic answer," he said. "Unfortunately, this is a technical demonstration, not a ferry dock in bad weather." Hannah did not flinch. She had heard that tone before from people who believed a uniform made a person smaller. "Then check the compartment," she said. Andrew's eyes narrowed. "Every compartment is checked." He gestured toward the wall-sized display. "Green lines. Green boxes. Green certainty. The system says lower deck access is clear." Another sound rose from beneath them. Faint. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. This time, One of the investors heard it. A man near the contract table lowered his glass and looked at the floor. Andrew saw the movement and disliked it instantly. Attention was supposed to move through him, not around him. Probably pressure adjustment, he said. Hannah turned toward the crew access stairs. Pressure does not count. The words were soft enough that only the closest guests heard them, but they traveled through the silence anyway. Andrew stepped closer. His ivory blazer caught the deck lights, clean and bright against the dark Atlantic behind him. Miss Brooks, I appreciate your concern, but I employ engineers, captains, safety officers, and an automated system valued at more than this entire event. You are here to serve dinner. Hannah set the silver tray down on the nearest table. One glass chimed lightly against another. Then dinner can wait. The event manager inhaled sharply. Andrew looked at the tray as if it had personally offended him. Excuse me. Someone below us may not be able to. The deck went still. Not silent exactly. The jazz continued near the lounge. The water moved against the hull. The screen kept glowing green. But the people had stopped pretending. Hannah walked past Andrew toward the crew access door. She did not run. Running would turn the warning into spectacle. She opened the emergency cabinet beside the stairwell and took the flashlight clipped inside, then pulled a small first aid pouch from the lower shelf. The event manager stepped forward. You cannot go down there. Hannah looked at the unlatched door, then at the green display still lying to the room. I think that is what someone hoped everyone would say. Andrew followed her with 2 long strides. Anger and curiosity now tangled in his face. If you open a restricted lower deck during a live demo, you could trigger a system alert. Hannah glanced back at him. That would be useful. One of the investors murmured something to his colleague. Andrew heard it and felt the first hairline crack in the evening. His pride wanted to stop her. His instincts, buried under years of command, told him the knocks had been real. Hannah stepped through the door. Yellow light climbed the narrow stairs from below. The air changed at once, cooler, metallic, carrying the smell of engine heat, cleaning solution, and sealed spaces. She held the flashlight low, one hand on the rail. Behind her, Andrew remained at the top for half a second, caught between the stage he owned and the warning he had mocked. Then he followed. This is unnecessary, he said, though his voice no longer sounded sure. Hannah descended carefully. Most emergencies begin that way. At the bottom, the hallway stretched beneath the luxury deck like the truth beneath a polished story. Pipes ran along the ceiling. Utility panels hummed behind gray doors. The knocks came again from the farm maintenance corridor. 3. Pause. 2. Closer now. Hannah stopped and listened until the sound ended. Andrew stood behind her, breathing harder than the stairs required. That area is sealed, he said. Nobody should be in there. Hannah turned the flashlight toward the corridor. A red manual override box hung open on the wall, its plastic cover cracked at the hinge, but not broken enough to trigger a visible alarm. Above it, a small sensor light glowed green. Clear. Safe. Empty. Hannah looked at Andrew. Your system is still smiling, she said. Then another knock came from behind the maintenance room door, weaker than before, and Andrew Kingsley finally stopped arguing with the floor. Hannah moved toward the maintenance room door with the flashlight steady in her hand. The corridor was narrow enough that Andrew's ivory blazer brushed the gray wall when he followed, and for the first time that evening, the expensive fabric looked out of place. Down here, there were no champagne glasses, no soft jazz, no investors smiling at numbers they barely understood. There was only metal, heat, yellow light, and a faint human sound coming from behind a door that every screen upstairs had called clear. Hannah stopped 1 foot from the door and leaned close without touching it. Hello, she said. My name is Hannah. I heard you. Can you answer me? For a second, only the low hum of the yacht replied. Then a voice came through the door, thin but controlled. Yes. Andrew stepped forward. Who is in there? Hannah lifted one hand slightly, not to silence him rudely, but to keep the voice from being buried under command. Tell me your name, she said. Evan, the voice answered. Evan Cole, systems technician. Andrew's face tightened. Evan. Recognition moved across him, followed quickly by disbelief. You were supposed to be off the vessel before the demo. I tried, Evan said. The door locked from outside. Andrew reached for the digital panel beside the frame. The small display glowed green. Maintenance compartment secure. No occupancy detected. He entered an owner override code with quick, sharp movements. The panel blinked once, then returned to green without opening. He tried again. Nothing. Hannah watched his hand. The first attempt had been pride. The second had been fear. Move back, Andrew said, mostly to himself, then lifted his phone and opened the Aegis Sea Control app. The screen showed the compartment in clean green text. Empty. Clear. Safe. He stared at it, as if the word safe had insulted him. This is not possible. Hannah crouched and angled the flashlight toward the bottom of the door. A narrow gap showed a dim slice of light inside. Evan, are you sitting or standing? Sitting. Good. Stay sitting. Are you hurt? No. Just tired. It is hot in here. The vent shut off after the reset. Hannah reached into the first aid pouch and pulled out a small water bottle. She tried the gap. Too narrow. She looked at the side seam, then the hinges. There is space at the lower corner if we open the seal trim. Andrew was still staring at the app. I can trigger a full system reset. Do not. Her voice stayed calm, but it cut through him. He looked down. Excuse me. If the vent already shut off after one reset, do not ask the system to surprise us twice. Evan gave a weak laugh from inside. She is right. Andrew's jaw tightened, not because she was wrong, but because she was not. Hannah used the flat end of a small bandage scissor from the pouch to loosen the rubber trim at the bottom corner. Not enough to damage the door, just enough to pass the water through. Evan, I am sliding water in now. Move slowly. A hand appeared in the shadow, took the bottle, and disappeared again. Andrew watched in silence. It was such a small act. Water through a gap. A voice kept steady. A person treated like a person before the problem had been solved. None of it appeared on his app. Why were you in there? Andrew asked. Evan took a few breaths before answering. I found a fault in the door sensor module. If someone resets the manual override at the right moment, the system reports no occupancy, even when the compartment is sealed. Andrew's eyes moved to the green panel. That is not in the final report. Because I was bringing the report to you tonight. Silence filled the corridor. Hannah looked at the open override box on the wall. Andrew looked at it too. The crack in his demonstration widened into something darker. This was not only a trap technician. This was a truth locked below deck, while men upstairs toasted a lie in perfect lighting. Who locked you in? Hannah asked softly. Evan hesitated. I did not see his face. What did you hear? Dress shoes. A phone call. He said the demo had to stay clean until signing. Andrew closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, the millionaire was still there, but the king was gone. Hannah turned back to the door. Then first we get you out, she said. After that, we let the truth breathe. Andrew reached for the override panel again, but this time his hand stopped before touching it. Hannah saw the pause. It was small, almost invisible, but it mattered. Pride moved fast. Responsibility slowed down long enough to think. Evan, Hannah said through the door, can you see the inside latch? Yes, he answered. But the auxiliary pin is stuck. It dropped after the reset. Andrew looked at the green sensor light, then at the open override box. There is no auxiliary pin in this model. Evan gave a tired breath from inside. There is when the manual safety kit is installed for demonstration vessels. It is supposed to prevent accidental opening during calibration. The words landed hard. Andrew had approved that kit 3 weeks earlier without reading the service notes beyond the executive summary. He remembered the meeting. He remembered nodding. He remembered thinking details were for people below him. Hannah crouched beside the lower corner of the door and passed a folded damp cloth through the loosened trim gap. Put this against the vent cover if the air feels hot, she said. Small breaths. Do not stand yet. Andrew looked at her. You have done this before. Hannah kept her eyes on the door. I have waited with people who were scared before. That is not the same as opening a sealed compartment. No, she said, but it is the part people forget while they argue with locks. Footsteps sounded from the corridor behind them. Captain Morris arrived with 2 crew members and the event manager, who looked as if she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. One crew member carried a compact tool case. The other held a portable radio. Sir, the captain said, upper deck is contained. Investors are waiting. The demo screen still shows all clear. Andrew almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the lie had become absurd. A man was sitting behind a locked door while his creation smiled green above champagne glasses. Keep the guests calm, Andrew said. Tell them we are verifying a lower deck signal manually. The event manager swallowed. That will raise questions. Andrew looked at the door. Good. Hannah glanced at him then. The answer had cost him something. She returned to the hinge side and pointed with the flashlight. If the auxiliary pin dropped, forcing the main handle could wedge it tighter. We need to relieve pressure first. The captain looked at her, then at Andrew, waiting for rank to decide whether common sense was allowed to speak. Andrew caught the look. An hour earlier, he would have taken over. Now he stepped back half a pace. Listen to her. The corridor changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The crewman knelt beside Hannah with the tool case. She asked for a rubber wedge, not a pry bar. A small manual crank, not a power driver. She spoke to Evan between each movement, telling him what sound he would hear before he heard it. Metal clicks were less frightening when someone named them first. You are going to hear the trim lift, she said. That is us, not the door failing. Okay, Evan replied. His voice was steadier now. Andrew stood by the panel, useless for the first time in a room built by his company. He wanted to be useful. The wanting surprised him. What can I do, he asked. Hannah looked up. Not long. Just enough to measure whether the question was real. Hold the light on the lower seam. Do not move it unless I ask. He did. The beam shook once, then steadied. The crewman slid the wedge into the narrow space Hannah had opened. The captain used the crank to ease the auxiliary pressure release from the access notch. The door gave a faint metallic sigh. Inside, Evan exhaled. That changed something. Good, Hannah said. Stay seated. Andrew's phone buzzed in his pocket. The Aegis C app refreshed. Still green. Still clear. Still wrong. He stared at it, then turned the screen face down against his palm. The flashlight mattered more now. The voice behind the door mattered more. Hannah's wine-red ribbon had loosened slightly, one strand of blonde hair falling near her cheek, but her focus did not shift. One more adjustment, she said. The captain turned the crank slowly. The auxiliary pin clicked. The sound was small. To Andrew, it felt like a verdict. The door opened 3 inches. Warm air slipped out. Hannah did not rush to pull it wider. Evan, move your feet away from the threshold. Done. Now slide your report toward the opening before you move. Andrew looked at her. The report. Hannah kept her eyes on the gap. If someone locked him in for it, we do not leave it behind. A folded file packet slid across the floor and touched the edge of the light. Andrew bent to pick it up, then stopped and used the clean cloth Hannah handed him without being asked. He held the packet carefully, as if paper had suddenly become heavier than steel. The door opened wider. Evan Cole sat on the floor inside, pale and tired, but alert, one hand still resting against the wall. Hannah offered him water first, then her hand. Andrew watched the technician take it. Not his, hers. And in that narrow below-deck corridor, surrounded by machines that had failed to tell the truth, Andrew Kingsley began to understand that trust did not follow ownership. It followed the person who listened. Evan Cole reached for Hannah's hand, as if it were the only steady thing left in the lower corridor. She helped him shift forward slowly, one breath at a time, while Captain Morris kept the door braced, and Andrew held the flashlight low against the threshold. Evan was younger than Andrew remembered, maybe 26, with sweat dampening his hair and a Kingsley Marine Systems badge clipped crookedly to his shirt pocket. He looked less like a technician from a product demo and more like a person who had spent too long being ignored by a machine designed to notice everything. Do not stand yet, Hannah said. Sit just outside the door first. Evan obeyed without argument. The crewman placed a folded towel against the wall, and Evan leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment as cooler air touched his face. Andrew stepped forward. Evan, who did this? Evan opened his eyes slowly. Sir, I heard someone outside the door before the reset. Dress shoes. A phone call. He said the demo had to stay clean until signing. Then the manual box clicked. Did he say a name? No. Andrew looked down at the file packet in his hand. It was sealed with a plain clip and marked internal review, door sensor module, urgent. He had built a company where urgent reports could be trapped below deck while celebratory slides glowed upstairs. That thought entered him without mercy. Hannah unscrewed the water cap and handed the bottle back to Evan. Small sips. Andrew almost asked another question, but stopped when she glanced at him. Not harshly, just clearly. The person came before the explanation. He understood that too late, but he understood it. The captain spoke into his radio, requesting a private medical check and asking the bridge to keep the upper deck calm. The radio crackled softly. Above them, the party music had stopped. In its place came the muffled sound of guests talking, uncertain and low. Andrew could imagine the investors staring at the green display, asking why the founder had disappeared below deck during his own demonstration. His pride wanted to run upstairs and control the story. His responsibility kept him beside Evan. "Can you walk?" Hannah asked. Evan flexed his hands, then nodded. "I think so." "Then we go slowly. No rushing for their comfort." Andrew looked at her. "Their comfort?" Hannah met his eyes. The people upstairs who would rather this be an interruption than a warning. The words did not accuse only the guests. They reached him too, and he did not look away. The crew helped Evan stand. He swayed once, and Andrew instinctively reached out, but Evan steadied himself with Hannah's arm. Again, trust did not follow ownership. It followed the person who had listened first. They moved back through the corridor as a group, Hannah beside Evan, Andrew carrying the report, Captain Morris ahead. As they reached the stairs, the wall panel above them flickered. Aegis C finally changed. The compartment behind them shifted from green to amber, then red. Delayed occupancy alert. Andrew stared at the words. Delayed. The system was late to the truth, and still it announced itself as if it had discovered something. Hannah looked at the screen, then at Andrew. She did not smile. That made it worse. "How long would he have been in there before it noticed?" she asked. Andrew had no answer. The stairs opened onto the upper deck, where the investors stood in a semicircle around the display. The sea wind moved over the yacht. Champagne glasses sat untouched. The event manager hovered near the contract table, pale under the golden lights. When Evan appeared, tired but upright, the room changed. People looked from him to the screen, where the maintenance compartment now glowed red. Then they looked at Andrew. Then at Hannah. Not a board member. Not an engineer. A waitress with a loosened wine-red ribbon and steady hands. Andrew felt the old instinct rise again, the urge to frame, explain, minimize, lead the room back into certainty. Before he could speak, Hannah set the small first aid pouch on the contract table and gently guided Evan into a chair. "He needs water and a few quiet minutes," she said. The sentence was not directed at anyone, yet everyone obeyed. Preston Ward, the lead investor from Harborstone Capital, stepped closer. His face was serious, not angry yet. Serious was worse. "Andrew," he said, "why did your system report all clear while your technician was locked below deck?" Andrew looked at the report in his hand, then at Evan, then at the green and red display that had become the most expensive contradiction on the Atlantic. "Because my system was wrong," he said. The deck went silent. Hannah turned slightly toward him, and for the first time that night, Andrew did not sound like a man defending a kingdom. He sounded like a man opening a door. Preston Ward did not speak at first. No one did. The words Andrew had just said seemed to move across the upper deck more slowly than the ocean wind. "Because my system was wrong." For 5 years, Kingsley Marine Systems had sold certainty. For one night, the Ivory Monarch had been turned into a floating showroom for trust. Now a young technician sat beside the contract table with a water bottle in his hands, and the green display behind him looked less like proof and more like a polished excuse. Andrew placed Evan's report on the table, but he did not slide it toward Preston yet. "Before anyone signs anything," he said, "this needs to be read in full." The event manager's eyes widened. One of the lawyers near the lounge moved as if to interrupt, then stopped when Andrew looked at him. Not with anger, with something quieter and more final. "No summaries," Andrew said. "No revised language. No protective phrasing." Hannah stood a few feet away, close enough to see Evan's hands still trembling slightly around the bottle, far enough to let the truth belong to the people who had hidden from it. Her tray remained where she had left it earlier, silver under warm lights, a small abandoned symbol of the role Andrew had tried to keep her inside. Preston picked up the report, opened the first page, and read without sitting down. His face changed before he reached the end of the first paragraph. "Manual reset vulnerability," he said. "False negative occupancy status. Door sensor masking during calibration mode." Andrew nodded once. Each phrase sounded worse in another man's voice. "Evan found it," Andrew said. "He tried to bring it forward tonight." Evan looked down. "I sent 2 internal flags last week." Andrew turned toward him. "To whom?" Evan hesitated. Not out of fear now, but because the name had weight. "Victor Lang." A murmur passed through the group. Victor Lang was Andrew's chief commercial officer, The man who had spent the whole evening smiling beside the investors and praising Aegis Sea as the safest marine platform in America. Andrew looked across the deck. Victor stood near the bar, phone in hand, his expression carefully blank. Too carefully. Hannah noticed the detail before Andrew did. Victor's polished black shoes were dry at the toes, but a pale line of maintenance dust marked one heel. Not enough to prove anything by itself. Enough to listen harder. Andrew followed her eyes. Victor, he said. The name crossed the deck without volume, but it carried command. Victor stepped forward, adjusting his cuff. Andrew, before this becomes unnecessarily dramatic, we should take this to a private room. Hannah watched Andrew then. This was the moment. Not the locked door. Not the failed app. This. The temptation to protect the empire from embarrassment. The old Andrew would have accepted the private room. The old Andrew would have chosen polish over air. He looked at Evan, then at the display, then at Hannah's loosened wine-red ribbon. No, Andrew said. The truth was locked in a private room. It comes out here. Victor's mouth tightened. Preston closed the report slowly. Did you receive these flags? Victor gave a small laugh. We receive hundreds of technical notes before launch. That was not the question, Preston said. The deck went still again. Captain Morris stepped beside the stairwell, quiet but present. The crew member with the radio stood near the service entrance. No one blocked Victor. No one accused him loudly. The scene did not need force. It needed facts. Hannah picked up the first aid pouch from the table and set it near Evan, then noticed something white tucked beneath the corner of the demonstration console. A folded access card sleeve. She did not touch it. Captain, she said softly, you may want to photograph that before anyone cleans this table. Andrew looked down. The sleeve bore Victor Lang's initials in silver. Beside it was a temporary lower deck access card, the kind issued for restricted maintenance zones during live demonstrations. Victor's face lost its practiced calm for one breath. Andrew saw it. So did Preston. Captain, Andrew said, secure the access logs, the stairwell camera, and the manual override data. Then notify harbor authorities when we dock. Victor's voice lowered. You would damage your own launch over a misunderstanding? Andrew looked at Evan, still tired, still alive, still holding the water Hannah had passed through a door no system would open. Then he looked at Victor. No, he said. I damaged it when I believed pride was the same thing as safety. Hannah lowered her eyes for a moment, not in submission, but in quiet relief. Above the black water, the green display finally dimmed as Captain Morris shut the demo down. For the first time that night, the yacht stopped pretending everything was clear. Harbor authorities were not yet on board, but the mood on the Ivory Monarch had already changed from celebration to testimony. The champagne remained untouched. The jazz trio packed their instruments without being asked. Investors stepped away from the contract table as if the papers had become wet paint. Victor Lang stood near the bar with his phone lowered at his side, no longer smiling, while Captain Morris quietly assigned one crew member to watch the stairwell and another to preserve the demonstration console exactly as it was. Andrew Kingsley stayed beside the table, reading the first 2 pages of Evan's report again, slower this time, not because he could not understand the technical language, but because he wanted to feel the weight of every warning he had allowed to become background noise. False negative occupancy status. Manual reset vulnerability. Calibration masking. Human confirmation required. The last phrase held him longest. Human confirmation required. Hannah Brooks stood near Evan, who now had a light blanket around his shoulders and more color in his face. She had found the blanket in a crew storage bench and handed it to him without announcing the kindness. That was how she did most things. Quietly. Completely. Andrew looked at her, then at the blanket, then down at his own ivory blazer. A few hours earlier, the blazer had been part of his armor. It had said wealth, command, control. Now it looked too clean for the room he had created. He removed it and draped it carefully over the back of Evan's chair, not on Evan's shoulders without asking, but close enough for him to take if he wanted it. You may be cold when we move to the dock office, Andrew said. Evan looked at the blazer, then at him. Thank you, sir. The word sir sounded different now. Less automatic. More cautious. Andrew accepted that. Respect, he was beginning to understand, could not be recovered by demanding familiar language. Preston Ward came to stand beside him. We are suspending the signing, he said. Andrew nodded. You should. And we will require an independent review. You should require that too. Preston studied him, perhaps expecting negotiation, perhaps expecting the polished resistance of a man protecting valuation. He found none. That will be expensive. Andrew looked toward the crew access stairs. So was not listening. Hannah heard it, but did not turn. She was helping Evan write down what he remembered while the details were still fresh. 3 knocks. Dress shoes. A phone call. The words the demo had to stay clean until signing. The manual box clicking. She wrote nothing for him. She only asked clean questions and gave space between them. Andrew watched her shape the truth without stepping on it. His lawyers could learn from that. Victor moved then, taking one careful step toward the lounge entrance. Captain Morris did not raise his voice. Mr. Lang, please remain on deck until we dock. Victor's jaw tightened. I have done nothing that justifies being detained. Then the access logs will be very helpful to you, Hannah said softly. Everyone heard her. Victor looked at her with irritation, then made the mistake Andrew had made earlier. He looked at the uniform before he looked at the woman. You seem very comfortable inserting yourself into matters above your position. Andrew turned toward him. The deck seemed to hold its breath. Earlier, he might have let the sentence pass. Earlier, he might even have agreed with it. Now it struck him as the oldest failure in the room. Her position, Andrew said, was the only one that saved my technician tonight. Victor's face hardened. You are letting a waitress steer a corporate crisis. Hannah closed the notebook and handed it to Captain Morris. Then she looked at Victor, not angry, not wounded, simply finished with the smallness of him. No, she said. I am letting the facts stand where your pride cannot reach them. Andrew felt the sentence move through him like the first honest air after a locked room. Preston looked from Hannah to Andrew, and whatever decision he was making became easier to see. The investment might return one day. The launch would not. Not in this form. Not under the same men. Andrew looked at Victor and spoke with a calm that surprised even himself. Until the review is complete, you are relieved of all launch authority. Victor's face went pale under the deck lights. Andrew. No private room, Andrew said. No clean demo. No quiet burial. The harbor lights appeared in the distance then, small gold dots across the black water. The yacht began turning slowly toward Newport, carrying fewer illusions than it had taken out to sea. Hannah gathered the empty water bottle, the first aid pouch, and the loosened strip of trim she had removed from the lower door. Andrew noticed she was cleaning up even after changing the course of his company. Miss Brooks, he said. She paused. Yes, Mr. Kingsley. He looked at the wine-red ribbon in her hair, at the steady eyes he had dismissed, at the deck full of people now listening because she had listened first. When we dock, he said, I would like you to give your account before mine. Hannah held his gaze. Only if Evan gives his before both of us. Andrew nodded. It was the right order. For once, he did not need to be first. The harbor lights grew wider as the Ivory Monarch entered Newport Harbor under a slower engine and a quieter sky. No one called it a party anymore. The upper deck had become a waiting room for consequences. Guests stood in small groups, speaking softly into phones or not speaking at all. The contract table remained untouched, its glossy folders closed beneath the dimmed demonstration screen. Aegis C no longer glowed green. It slept black and silent, as if ashamed of its own certainty. Evan sat near the rail with the blanket around his shoulders, and Andrew's ivory blazer folded across his lap. He had not put it on. Not yet. Hannah noticed that, but she did not comment. Some gestures needed time before they could be accepted. Andrew stood a few feet away, watching the dock come closer. In the reflection of the dark glass beside the lounge door, he saw himself without the blazer for the first time that night. Less finished, less untouchable, more human. Mr. Kingsley, Captain Morris said, stepping beside him. Harbor authorities are ready to meet us at Pier 6. I have preserved the access logs, camera footage, override panel data, and the demonstration console. Nothing has been cleaned or moved except for medical comfort. Andrew nodded. Good. Then he corrected himself. Thank you, Captain. The captain's eyes flickered with surprise. A small word. A late word. Still, it landed. Hannah was at the service station, rinsing a glass she did not need to rinse. The task gave her hands somewhere to be. She could feel Andrew wanting to speak before he had earned the right words. She did not help him find them. That was not her job. Preston Ward approached her instead. Miss Brooks, he said, careful now with her name. When we reach the dock office, May our review team include your account in the preliminary record? Hannah set the glass down. Evan should speak first. He will. Then yes. Preston looked at her with the serious respect of a man revising more than a deal. You heard what our systems, our staff, and our incentives ignored. Hannah looked toward the crew access stairs. I heard knocking. Most people would have walked away after being dismissed. Most people have been taught dismissal is a locked door. Preston absorbed that quietly. Across the deck, Victor Lang sat under the watch of Captain Morris and two crew members, no longer performing calm. His phone had been sealed in an evidence pouch. The access card sleeve with his initials lay photographed and untouched beside the console. No one needed to raise a voice. The facts had become heavy enough on their own. The yacht touched the dock with a soft thud. Lines were thrown. The gangway lowered. Cold Atlantic air moved through the deck, and Evan finally lifted Andrew's blazer from his lap and placed it around his shoulders. Andrew saw it and looked down, not in pride, but in relief. The first people aboard were not reporters or executives. They were harbor officers in dark jackets, polite, focused, asking for the captain and the person who had been trapped below deck. Andrew stepped forward by habit, then stopped. He turned to Evan. You first. Evan looked at him, then at Hannah. She nodded once. He rose slowly, still tired but steady, and walked toward the gangway with Captain Morris beside him. Hannah followed at a respectful distance. Andrew followed after her. Not ahead, not surrounded by lawyers, not controlling the shape of the story before it could breathe. In the dock office, under fluorescent lights far less flattering than the yacht's golden glow, Evan gave his account. He spoke of the report, the ignored flags, the lower deck, the reset, the locked door, and the knocks. His voice shook only once. Hannah placed a cup of water near his hand without interrupting. When it was her turn, she described the sounds, the pattern, the unlatched crew access door, the open manual box, the green light that lied, and the decision to go below. She did not make herself larger. She did not make Andrew smaller. The truth did both without assistance. Andrew listened from the corner, hands folded, eyes lowered. When the officer asked for his statement, he stood. I dismissed her warning, he said. That is where this began for me. Hannah looked up then. For him, perhaps it had. For Evan, it had begun earlier, in unread reports and polished rooms. For men like Victor, it had begun wherever ambition learned to fear honesty. Andrew seemed to understand that before she said it. But the failure began before tonight, he added. It began when my company made it easier to trust a green light than a human voice. The officer wrote it down. Outside the window, the ivory monarch rested against the dock, beautiful, expensive, and finally still. By the time the statements were finished, the first pale line of morning had begun to rise over Newport Harbor. The dock office smelled of coffee, printer paper, and salt carried in on jackets. It was not a grand room. There were no marble walls, no gold lighting, no panoramic screen promising certainty. There was a square table, a humming vending machine, a row of metal chairs, and enough plain light to make every expensive excuse look tired. Evan Cole sat near the window with Andrew's ivory blazer still around his shoulders, giving one final detail to the harbor officer while Captain Morris confirmed the preserved logs. Victor Lang had been escorted to a separate room for questioning, still composed from a distance, but smaller now, without an audience to mistake polish for truth. Preston Ward stood by the coffee machine, reading a copy of Evan's report page by page. He did not rush. No one did. The night had taught them what rushing past warnings could cost. Hannah Brooks stood near the door with her black apron folded over one arm and her wine-red ribbon slightly loose in her blonde hair. She looked out at the ivory monarch through the window. The yacht gleamed at the pier, beautiful in the dawn, as if nothing had happened. That was the strange thing about luxury. It could shine after almost anything. Andrew stepped beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a while, neither spoke. The harbor gulls called over the water. A crew member walked across the dock carrying a sealed evidence pouch. Somewhere behind them, a printer released another page of the truth. Miss Brooks, Andrew said at last. His voice had lost the stage. Hannah is fine. He nodded. Hannah. He looked at the yacht, then at the reflection of his own face in the glass. I owe you an apology that is larger than the moment I dismissed you. Hannah did not turn immediately. Then do not make it only about me. The answer did not soften him. but it steadied him. You are right. He swallowed. I dismissed Evan before I ever met him in that corridor. I dismissed the reports. I dismissed the crew. I dismissed every small warning that did not arrive through the channels I respected. Hannah looked at him then. And the channels you respected were the ones that protected your pride. Andrew accepted it without defense. Yes. Outside, Evan rose from his chair and stepped onto the dock with the officer, still wearing the blazer. Andrew watched him, and something in his expression shifted. Not ownership. Not embarrassment. Responsibility. Kingsley Marine will suspend the launch, Andrew said. Independent review. Full disclosure to the investors. Every unresolved safety flag reopened. Direct reporting protection for technicians and crew. No executive filter. Hannah listened. Promises were easy near sunrise. Harder in boardrooms. That would be a start, she said. He almost smiled, but did not earn it. A start, he repeated. Preston approached from behind them, report in hand. Miss Brooks, Evan asked if you would stay until he finishes the medical check. Hannah nodded. Of course. Preston looked at Andrew. Harborstone is withdrawing from the launch as scheduled. But if the review is honest, and if the leadership changes are real, we will consider returning later. Andrew looked at the report. Fair. Preston's eyes moved to Hannah. For what it is worth, the most reliable safety system on that yacht tonight was not installed by Kingsley Marine. Hannah lowered her gaze for a moment, uncomfortable with praise when a person had nearly been left unheard below deck. It was not a system, she said. It was listening. Andrew turned fully toward her then. The man who had laughed on the upper deck was gone, or at least no longer in charge of his face. You said something before you went downstairs, he said. Systems do not hear shame. People do. Hannah adjusted the folded apron in her hands. People can ignore it too. He nodded. I know. The sun lifted higher, touching the yacht's white hull and the quiet water around it. Evan came back inside with the officer and handed Andrew the ivory blazer. Andrew did not take it at once. Keep it until you are warm, he said. Evan held his eyes for a second, then nodded. That small acceptance seemed to move through the room more gently than applause ever could. Hannah stepped toward the door. Her shift had ended hours ago, but the night had not let her leave as only a waitress. Andrew opened the door for her, not as a performance, not because anyone important was watching, but because he finally understood that respect was not a speech. It was a habit built in small motions. On the dock, the morning air was cool and clean. Behind them, the ivory Monarch rested silently, its polished decks waiting for people honest enough to repair what pride had hidden. Hannah walked toward the pier with Evan and Captain Morris. Andrew followed a few steps behind, carrying nothing but the weight he should have carried sooner. Real safety does not begin with sensors. It begins with believing the first quiet warning.